Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, folks. Welcome to Karate Without Belts. I'm John, always the John, joined by
Jeremy. So, hey, how's everybody doing?
hopefully you're all good and warm and snuggly, if not nice and comfortable. Apparently, Jeremy is dealing with a mini ice age right now, while I'm dealing with a mini typhoon season.
It's pretty brutal here. So, anyway,
I can imagine. I've heard legendary stories of Midwestern winter, to which I've only really ever seen like a very scant version when I was over at your place for New Year's that one year.
yeah,
And I kept on hearing about like, oh, Midwestern winter. And I was there. I was like, I mean, I'm from Northeast in the States. It wasn't really all that much of a difference, but apparently now the States is getting hit pretty bad with it.
well, yeah. I mean, it's one thing around here. It's like one week it'll be teens or whatever, and next week it'll be in the 60s, and next week it'll be down in 30s. I mean, it just hops all over the place. And just right now, it's they're calling for the high. What was it on Tuesday to be like minus 20? So it's like no, I don't ever remember it ever being that cold. Ever, 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 ever. So I mean, it's gotten cold, but not like that. They're saying wind chills of like minus 40, minus 50. So it's like everybody's running around. World's coming to an end. Oh my goodness.
I suppose.
So
Well, you just gotta. But I know where I'm from in the States. I have family members who just like weren't able to go out for a little while because of all the snow.
Yeah.
So, and with COVID, that in itself is tough. Meanwhile, we've got here in the northern Ryukyu Kingdom, as I will state as far as my location will go, we're having mini typhoon weather. So it stopped boats and fun little stopping boats, stopping supplies, stopping food, stopping. But thankfully the boats are fine again. I like how in America things happen and everyone like tries to immediately shut everything down. And in Japan, like there'll be a little trip and then they'll be like, well, put some duct tape on it and let's keep going.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. So anyway. So
what have you been up to in terms of training recently?
Training recently, it's interesting. I've been working a lot with Joe and Cy lately for some reason. That's just kind of what I've been picking up, a little bit of Saison. So that's kind of mainly what I've been working on. Not so much with Joe and Cy Kata, a little bit of that, but more technical aspects of it, seeing how working through some technique, technical background, stuff like that. So
yeah, I've been working with Saison a bit more as kind of per our what we've kind of been jumped with the beginning of the year, and just taking some cues you've been giving me and a couple other people have been giving me and working with that and bouncing that off of like sparring technique and stuff like that. It's been okay, but my rhythm of training has not been great as of late. I'm trying to get it back to a better position. Apparently, some people have been in great positions. Because this is going to sound terribly American of us, that Jeremy's home state of Missouri has lost their acclaimed Super Bowl title.
Yeah, well, that's all right. That's okay.
But this had precipitated our topic of today, which is losing or loss, and how to make our way back from it.
Yeah.
I think we can come at this from a couple different ways. Jeremy, you wanted to deliver the opening salvo with a relation to the Super Bowl. So everyone who doesn't watch football, skip to the next time code.
Well, I'm gonna start there, but I'm gonna jump in pretty quickly into more martial arts based. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is before the Super Bowl, everybody's talking about how the quarterback for Kansas City. Oh, he's like the greatest thing since sliced bread and this, that, and the other thing. And after the Super Bowl, it's like everybody's like, oh, he's just terrible and this, that, and the other thing. And you look at it, and the guy's only had, I believe, 10 less. I think it's less than 10 losses in 3 years that he's played. And you're like, it's like, I don't know about you. That's the Super Bowl or not. That's pretty amazing. That's a pretty amazing win record. And then you look at the other one I started thinking about, and this came up on my phone the other day, and I'm like, oh, I hadn't watched this in forever, but it was kind of like when like the UFC fights Ronda Rousey.
Oh yeah,
everybody was like, oh,
making
she's
a
like
big deal of it. God, when
yeah,
was
I
that?
mean,
Like 5 years ago?
yeah, 4 or 5 years. Yeah,
Maybe more than that.
Yeah, it was around then.
So we're not
But
big MMA guys, and the circles we were traveling in, like they were talking about that too.
oh yeah, it was like, yeah, everybody was talking about how Ronda could take on Floyd Mayweather and this, that, and the other thing. And just like, time out. No. But I
I
mean,
feel she should start her own mystery team now that she's out of that. But
well, yeah,
like Mike Tyson, but
well, I mean, in all honesty, I mean, you look at, I mean, everybody thought she was like the greatest thing since sliced bread again, and then she has one loss, and then everybody's like, oh, she really sucked, and this and the other thing. It's like, when you really looked at it, I mean, technically, I mean, she was a fairly sound fighter. I mean, I think things just got a little bit carried away, and kind of one of the old sayings is, on one of the old football sayings. I think it was maybe Vince Lombardi said. I don't know who said this, but on any given Sunday, any given team can beat any other given team, no matter what. So it's like, I mean, you could be the worst, but come back and just have that one lucky shot. So
that's really all it takes. Like we forget that. That's why they call it the game, in the more of the broader sense, is
yeah,
that anybody can win, anybody can lose. There's probabilities involved, sure. Unless you're involved with the mafia and have money riding on the game and somehow manage to get a player on your side or something like that. Anybody can beat anybody. Anybody can win. Anybody can lose. That's why it is a game, and in a larger context.
Yeah,
Martial arts.
And I mean, you look at kind of one of the other big ones was, I mean, you can go through history and see them, but I mean, like Mike Tyson when he lost to Buster Douglas. I mean, nobody had even heard of Buster Douglas, and he gets in there and knocks Tyson out. You're like, everybody's like, what? And so, I mean, I don't know. I just thought about this week, and it's like, what do you do to get back up when you get knocked down or knocked out?
I think we don't really view it in terms of that. We only view that from a spectator perspective. We don't really view that from a participant perspective because because we have never been particularly partakers of sport karate or tournament scene or anything particularly like that. We've been observers, but we've never really been participants.
But I mean, let's put this in a real world perspective.
Right.
What about when you're working and you lose that promotion or you don't get this, you don't get now it's not quite as big as
millions of people seeing your bloody body on the floor unconscious. No.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's just every day, something will knock somebody down a little bit. It's like how do you deal with it? I mean, sometimes you just dust it off. Sometimes, it takes a while. It just a lot of different things. So I mean, I'm just
I think I can relate a little to that in terms of knowing. We want to talk about karate training in terms of more of more of the personal rather than the competitive.
yeah,
I think there's two ways you can go about it that are more obvious, and there's another that's not so obvious. The first way of going about this rather obvious is talking about injuries. Right? People get injured, they do karate, they get older, or something happens. Really, age doesn't really matter, right?
right,
Uh, you're doing something physical, doing sparring, you're doing whatever, get hurt, you can't do it anymore. You have to work your way to healing and then going back. You don't want to continue to have the same injuries. You have to come back bigger and smarter, right?
yeah,
The second one is losing a teacher, is having that physical loss of someone in your life,
yeah,
which is difficult and hard and probably not physically that different, but difficult, but very, very emotionally hard. And especially with whatever relationship you fostered with whoever that loss has been, will be difficult to reestablish because you have to reestablish a normal.
yeah,
Both are about that. All of them are about that because the third not so obvious one is that point of life, like you're saying, that is not so obvious, which is not an injury or not a death, but something that knocks you down a peg, possibly from a personal perspective, possibly from a physical perspective, but definitely from a mental perspective and definitely from an emotional perspective. Um, I know when I was younger and I did a lot of training, I did a lot of just just training every day, training when I was younger, and then just going into having just my life slightly changed and just going to college and just those patterns and habits are gone and not being able to tap back into that same space that I was in or not being able to tap back into that same life that I was in and feeling that great loss of just familiarity and consistency and not knowing how to replace it. And that sent me for a little while, sent me into a weird down spiral, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, it brings up memory of mine from a guy from college that I knew. I mean, straight 4.0 student, had amazing success, got in the real world, struggled, and ended up, I don't know what the deal was, but ended up committing a crime and ended up going to jail. I mean, it's just like he couldn't handle the real world because before it was just, put on a platter. And, you look at some of these people, some of the martial artists out there. I mean, I'm not directly calling anybody out, but how many times have you seen some of these people like, oh yeah, I've trained in whatever, and I'm like a 200-degree black belt, and you get in the ring with even just an average MMA person, and the MMA person just knocks them silly.
Oh, that story. It
I mean,
happens
there's
enough where it's almost a
pages.
trope.
I mean, there's pages and pages of it on YouTube of people that are doing that, and it's like, I mean, I can at least appreciate the fact that they're willing to stand up, but the thing I can't appreciate is the fact that they believe their own stuff so bad that they're not willing to look at reality.
And
And
I
and
think we forget that
huh?
those are people. They're not
Right.
YouTube videos. That there's a person behind that ego. And in this case we're talking about ego.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Oh yeah.
And in the positive in the regular.
Yeah, yeah,
because everyone has that part of themselves that they need something to establish their identity. When
yeah.
people say have no ego, we forget that's the thing that actually allows you to say I am me and not dog and or wall.
Right.
So, I mean, a part of your ego is going to be invested, especially when you invest a lot of time in your training. A lot of that's going to be invested in there. And when you just in hopefully in good faith, those people who do that, who go up against those challenges and then get the floor wiped with them because their training's not up to snuff or they don't understand what they're doing or
Right.
whatever, or they've had their world rocked, as it were. Um, Understanding even that, how to come back from, wow, that's not what I thought that was going to be.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, you know, I mean, even I remember the first time I got knocked out. Sparring. I mean, part of me was like, "Holy cow! What the heck just happened? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this." But then I got back up, and I I, I was thankful for Robbie whenever that did happen. I mean, he sat me down. He kind of coached me through. I was like, "Look, it happens to
Oh, we
everybody."
lost you.
Oh, you there?
Yep, I
Yeah.
got you now.
Okay. Um. Yeah.
You're saying Robbie got you.
Yeah. I mean, Robbie realized it was a hard lesson for me, but he was good enough to set me down, really explain what happens. Like, look, this happens to everybody. Just learn from it. And I think that not only helped me during that part, but I mean it's helped me through life. Different times, like if I've gotten like laid off or stuff like that. Hey, look, it happens. So I, I think that's one of the things that that needs to be there whenever you do get knocked down, knocked out, whatever, is what kind of support system you've got. Who are your real friends when you really need them? Things like that.
So let's dig into the guts in this a little. So let's talk about not any specific situations, but let's talk about the anatomy of this, the anatomy of a loss and the anatomy of a comeback.
Okay. Yeah.
So what's the anatomy? Like what's our setup here? So the setup of a loss is somebody thinking that they're not going to lose, right?
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not anticipating it. And in fact, what's probably worse than the actual loss itself is the shock of it actually happening,
Yeah.
the like unanticipatedness of it.
Well, I mean, if you look at it, it's kind of like a failed expectation. You
Right.
you're expecting it, and therefore you don't meet it. Therefore, you fail
Right.
in one way,
Now,
shape, or form.
and now, assuming this loss does not involve death or irrevocable destruction,
Right.
what is the kind of the down motion, the up motion? I suppose because you're talking about it really depends on your support system. Imagine not having that support system.
True.
So, or needing to build it from scratch or build it from zero. How does one go about having that loss happen? And we don't want to be too ephemeral with it, so let's put it in terms of a fight, or let's put it in terms of just getting knocked down for whatever reason, in
Yeah.
terms of either measuring what training you've done and it not being enough, measuring the training that you've done and it not being sufficient to the rules of the fight that you engaged in, or thinking that you're in a physical you're in a much less advantageous physical position than you were before, and you might not be actually physically all that much harmed, damaged. There might not be anything to come back from, But then, what is the next part of that path, and what is the support that needs to be there in order for you to succeed, as it were?
Personally, I think this is just my thought. I think you got to get to a place of being humble, if that makes sense.
No,
Like,
it does.
and what I mean by that is, instead of like denying something that happened or being defensive or however that takes place, I think it's more like, okay, this happened. This is not what I expected it. And instead of blaming and looking all outside, looking at yourself like, okay, what happened with what I did? What did I do wrong? Where where am I at fault? What happened? If that makes sense.
Well, and that isn't necessarily, and then that also comes into self-awareness. So if you're
Right.
not aware of what your own, and this is precisely why the failure happens, because you're not aware of what you can and cannot do.
Right.
Um, and in some situations, some people might be well aware that they might not actually be able to do something, or they think, but they, let's say that they thought that they did, for your sake of argument, they're not able to. So I mean, so the first step, I suppose, is understanding and recognizing that you weren't able to do it. What you were doing before, or was either not enough, or you didn't work hard enough, or that probably what you were doing just wasn't sufficient to what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
All right. So what's the next step, I suppose?
I would say probably the next step would be, you know, either learning or regressing.
Regressing. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I
What?
mean, I'll give a total separate example. Like when I was in high school, I, don't laugh. I was a fairly decent basketball player. I was looking to play college ball after high school. Not not Division One. I mean, probably could have played Division Two. Um, Circumstances happened to where that just didn't happen. Um, I got to the point after that season, and I looked at it. I'm like, you know what? It's time to move on. This just is not working.
So not
It's
necessarily regression, but you have to kind of strip back to zero.
pretty much, yeah. And um, what? After what 30 some years from high school, um, I'll shoot free throws with somebody or something like that, but that's about it. I mean, I won't play any pickup games. I won't play anything else, but that's about it. After day in, day out, practice, practice, practice. But I mean, that's what I mean by regression. Just totally like, you know what? This isn't working. I don't see this as something that's going to work. Time to move on. But on the other hand, it's like, hey, this didn't work. My drive is to get better at this. How can I learn from this? So I think there's two parts of this. Either you learn from it or you regress from it and move on.
And it's not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Because let's use our example. Let's use an example from something we've talked about before.
Yeah.
If you get into the ring with somebody and you start, and all you've done is kata training and kata by number training, and then you
Yeah.
get into the ring with someone and you get knocked down, and you're outside and like you got tears running down your eyes, and you don't know why you lost, and people are trying to comfort you, and you know exactly why you lost because all you do is kata by number training.
Well,
And this is that story is slightly autobiographical
yeah.
because that's what happened to me when I first pogoed, and it took me a little while to understand. Oh, that wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
That was my fault because I stepped in there when I shouldn't have. but that wasn't my fault because all I was being fed from the people who were training me was cut it by number, cut it by number. That'll be everything you need. Cut it by number, cut it by number. And then 10 minutes before, or like the minute, or like a couple seconds before, the same guy who was saying that was saying, try to use your legs more. People don't remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, how helpful is that?
Yeah. I mean,
if that is in
I
any
mean,
way a good example.
Do you actually remember the first time you did Bogu?
You were there.
Yeah, I was the one. Yeah, I was trying to get
It's not like this a personal story about John's embarrassing first time out. But I mean, in that particular situation is an exact example of that. Let's say let's say I wanted to do more and more and more on that. I mean, the first thing, and if I wanted to go with you, go on, look at our anatomical view of this. The first thing I do is just chuck all the kata training.
Yeah,
and that and people are justified in thinking that, because if all they're doing is doing kata by number, in the supposed traditional setting, and there's not even emphasis on physical fitness.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Of course they're gonna do that. Of course they're gonna walk away and go somewhere else that can give them that. It's not to get into that discussion, but zoom out from the anatomy of the failure, and the loss, as it were.
Yeah.
And to relate back to your point of these traditional guys going up against those guys, of course they're gonna have that view. Somebody's gonna could very easily take on that view, and there's plenty of people who have.
Well, I mean, think about even a less safe environment. Let's say you're out on the street and all you've done is kata by number training. Somebody comes and attacks you. You end up in the hospital or worse. I mean, you're thinking about all the money
Like
and
the worst hospital.
Hours. I mean, yeah, think about all the money and the hours and the blood, the sweat. I mean, well, maybe not the blood, but I mean the sweat and just the perseverance, just going through all that, and really, it didn't accomplish what you wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you go from there?
Exactly.
Where do you go from there? I mean,
hey, you can just give up, or like something. And this is why do you think people are, the and I don't want to get into this too much, but it's like the paranoia over, well, you don't know what's going to happen next, so you should own a firearm, or you should have this or that, right? There's lots of people. There's lots of that kind of paranoia out there to a degree.
well,
I don't want to get into the weeds on that, because I mean, there's that, but I mean, how is that person not justified then in believing that paranoia 100%, with the added trauma of actually having gone through that?
Yeah, I mean, and saying that was, what was it? This happened, but maybe over the last 6 months or so. Kind of when things were getting kind of, heated with different protests and things like that. And
last 6 months.
Well, 9 months, 10, whatever. Last year, whatever.
Last couple of weeks.
Well, not too. I mean,
we're dating the podcast terribly by doing this, but that's fine.
That's okay. But we start off with the Chiefs. I mean, so it's,
yeah.
I mean,
this would be, I think, our second Super Bowl look back episode.
Yeah, maybe.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, whatever. But I mean, they brought on a guy who was like some instructor at the FBI here in Kansas City, and the guy's like, look, the only way you can, people are talking about guns and this and that and the other thing. The only way you can truly defend yourself is that, first off, you have to be aware of your surroundings, period. End of discussion. It doesn't matter what you got. It's like, yeah, somebody can bring something more, but until you're aware, you can have a Sherman tank, and if you're not aware of it, guess what? Somebody can still attack you. It's like, duh, I mean, and that's one of the things I've always led into any self-defense seminar that I've done, is like, you have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to be aware of what's going on. You cannot stick your head in the phone. So getting back to I mean, I know we're kind of going around in circle on this,
No,
but
this is very useful. This is, I think, useful because we are looking specifically at this anatomy of loss and comeback, right?
yeah,
And there is an anatomy to it that I think a lot of people have issue with. They know the loss part and they know, oh yeah, and then I lost weight and whatever and got here, or I retrained and won or whatever,
right, right,
um, but they don't know how it happens,
right.
right? So this is very, very useful. So right,
But
getting back to kind of, I guess, maybe the more rising action, as it were.
yeah, I mean, but I mean, the bottom line is, I mean, whether it's self-awareness, awareness,
Right.
outside awareness, I mean that's the main thing. I mean, and from that awareness, you're either gonna move forward, progress, or you're gonna say, "Hey, it's time to cut bait and move on."
Yeah.
Bottom
So
line,
let's go in let's look at those two directions, right?
yeah,
So we're gonna cut bait. Those are some. That actually leaves you more towards kind of it's where we've gone to a bit of degree, right? Because we've cut bait from a lot of stuff, but we still train,
right. I
but
mean,
we don't. We've cut bait from a lot of like unnecessary stuff.
right,
Uh, so
yeah,
I think maybe it is a part of that is just cutting out the unnecessary, right?
yeah,
Cutting out the things that aren't going to actually help you improve, which is
yeah,
probably what allows people what sets people up to lose in the first place, right?
right. Well, when you think about that, I was kind of cutting bait whenever I was a part of the organization. Like I'd look at this like this is useless. This isn't worth the crap, and
Well,
I,
tons of organizations are like that.
well, yeah.
And
I mean, yeah, I know that caused a little more than a little friction. So, but that's okay. That's fine. I don't care.
well,
But
and I think that's the thing with a lot of these karate organizations is that they end up just putting people exactly in that situation where they're not set, and we can even prefix the losses are people actually set up to succeed,
yeah, and,
and there
and
are and there's and the responsibility of the people who are in charge to set them up to succeed,
right,
right?
and,
How many karate
and
teachers don't teach the awareness part? Do they just say, "All right, get on the floor. All right, get in your stance. All right, blah 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 blah," like
uh,
whatever, right? Rather than laying a better groundwork.
it happens more than a lot of people think. I mean, I've seen a ton of that, and it's shocking. Um, and you see the results of people who are fourth, fifth, sixth dan rank, which should be somewhat masterful in what they're doing, and they have no clue when you ask a simple question or bring a simple, just something very simple to them, whether it's a technique, whether it's just a simple question on, hey, how you do this? Oh, you know,
Well, and it is. I mean, it's the artificiality of the rank to setting those people up to fail too,
yeah.
because they're gonna. I mean, because they're gonna lose. How many people are gonna lose out from just not not losing? I guess is that's one thing. Not having that experience, right? Because if you never have the experience of losing, you never have the real experience of success, right?
Well, no,
You don't realize what a success actually means.
not
Um,
on that, but I think you lose out on the actual opportunity to truly learn.
well, and that's not to say we learn more from our failures than our successes. That is true. Almost to the point where that's a trope now. But
Yeah,
uh, that's there's an important distinction between failure, something that didn't work, versus a loss,
right.
which is everything you tried did not work.
Well,
Everything didn't. Nothing worked, and
well,
something was taken away. right?
Well, I mean, think about it. Is that different? Is it really different, or is it just a smaller scale?
I mean, no, I mean we can word around it, but I think the loss because you think about loss of face. Think of it
Yeah.
that way. I don't. I'll try back to the Bogu example.
Hmm.
I lost a lot of face that day. I lost a lot of face that day with students. I lost a lot of face with seniors. I lost a lot of face with a lot of different people. And then over the next 2 years, I actually remember losing more face for different reasons. And then I
Well,
came back. I came back having how. I mean, I don't want to make this personal story, but like how I came back from that was just okay. What went wrong? This is what went wrong. You weren't training the right way. You weren't taking the advice from people the right way. You weren't working with people who wanted you to do something else. You just thought do this thing that some people who weren't really cognizant of what needed to happen. So don't the people who were just saying do kata by numbers. Okay, maybe they're not necessarily people to work with. Maybe you got to work with people who actually care about analyzing, like you, who cared about real world situations, like some other people who cared about actually, this is how you bogu
yeah.
before we can actually send you out to bogu.
This is the mindset you need to be in. This is this. This, it's
Well, and the mindset is ultimately analytical of knowing, okay, this is why I lost. This is how you come back and succeed and win by, okay, I lost face in front of people. Okay, show humbleness, right? Show that you don't know everything.
mhm.
Because I remember the next year coming back to that stuff, being in a much, much worse position physically and a lot of different ways. And then suddenly a bunch of people were looking at me on like what to do and feeling much more embarrassed and feeling like I lost a lot more face. And that's a big thing. That is a thing. Everyone acts like, oh, that's a big Asian thing that doesn't exist in America. No, 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 no. There's plenty of loss of face in America. People lose face all the time in America. That's a thing. That's a thing in the West too. Everyone acts like that's not a thing here. Thing there. It's interpreted much differently, but it
Yeah,
is a thing. People will still have those conversations, those small conversations that determine your standing with people. How you gain that back is just by admitting to it and accepting it, and then just continuing to improve and grind,
yeah,
and needing to figure out, okay, this didn't work. Start small, work big. Start small, go big, as big as you can. At least that was my perspective at
yeah.
that time. I don't know if you have maybe something of a different perspective in terms of that. But in
Uh,
terms of the anatomy of it, is just you have to take it from a small place and then work towards building it up further.
I, I think the other thing though is, when you do get, I guess, forcibly humbled in one way or another. Let's put it to you that way.
I feel
I
like
think,
humbled in that regard. Humbled is almost unforcibly. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
you can't ever be not forcefully. You can humble yourself, but I mean,
yeah,
you need to have the insight to do that already. So it probably already makes you humble. But if
yeah.
you're
Well,
humbled,
yeah. I mean, but I think when that does happen, I think one of the things that I know I go to is like, I can fix this. I can take care of this. And I think one of the things, whenever something like that, I've got to strip away from that. It's like, okay, I also need input from other people to help me succeed. And if you're not willing to take that input from somebody else, I think it makes it even more difficult to deal with. If that makes sense.
well, and because you're just going to repeat the cycle, right?
Right.
You weren't.
Yeah,
You didn't figure it out. You didn't
right.
make the necessary changes. You didn't do the either of the things. You didn't either cut loose or walk away or re-examine and do and fix the problem. You just, all right, I'm going to do it again
Yeah.
the same exact way.
Yeah. yeah, what's the definition of insanity? You continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. You're not going to. And I mean, do you mind if I kind of go on a little bit about your BOGO experience and
Oh,
when I was
sure.
trying?
The maybe 1 minute that of it that actually happened. I
Well,
think it was probably closer to 30 seconds, but
no, I mean, for the level of training that you'd had in Bogu and to step into that arena, so to speak. I mean, really, you didn't do too bad. It's just the part that made it difficult because I was the one trying to get your helmet off and stuff and trying to get you back going, and you were like, I don't understand why I'm got why'd they call the match and this that and the other thing. Well, I told you, I'm like, dude, your legs are about gone, buddy. It's like you just stop. You just stop. It's okay. Don't don't try to push a bad situation, make it worse. You know, I don't
yeah.
even know if you even remember that, but I mean, I was
I
like,
remember I remember you pulling something off of me. I remember it getting stopped really quickly. Here's the other thing I remember because it wasn't just me. I know there was a bunch of that stuff continued to happen.
yeah,
Like, because I remember going in there and it was just watching like the shit show happen of a bunch of people who just uh weren't ready or didn't
right,
know what they were doing or
yeah,
hadn't done it or did it like 20 years ago but didn't know, like it was just a bit of grandstanding. It wasn't a lot of people who knew what they were doing, or and I remember what was it, the guy who I'd fought had like quote unquote won the tournament, and it was, or did he? I forget if he did or not, but it didn't really matter because it was just it was supposed to just be a seminar that
yeah,
ended up becoming,
like a tournament almost. I
and
mean,
then it that no one prepared for or even knew about,
yeah,
and then like, and so that's setting that I was set up to kind of fail in that regard, even though I volunteered.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, looking back, years later, yeah, there should have been a lot more progression into where that took place. There should have been a lot more progression into that
which
instead
is
of
a loss, which for the thing that happened in itself was a loss because then how many people wanted to BOGO after that? How many people wanted to actually do like? I remember a couple of years after that, no one wanted to step up for it. But I also remember a couple of years later when I thrown back into that,
yeah,
I actually did okay. And
yeah.
actually, the people who were doing it, who were calling it, was like that got called wrong.
Well, none of that. It gets into training,
Yeah,
and this gets into our whole discussion. Is like not only that, but whoever is also responsible for taking care of that kind of stuff should also be trained very, very well as well.
mm.
Because in that situation, like where I mean, some of the you can go out and look at YouTube videos and you'll watch some referees not break up. I mean, an obvious beat down in a UFC ring. Same way with Bogu. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's easy to see somebody get hit in the headshot because their head's moving back. But not a lot of times you're seeing people hit right into the chest and stuff and basically moving your chest back. That's also part of it. And I think that also brings some upset as well. It's like you're doing well, but you're not given credit for doing well. I mean, if that makes sense, and therefore you don't
Right.
get the result. I mean, granted, we're talking about Bogu, but I mean, this can be in anything.
Well, and then it goes out to what you're talking about in self defense, right?
Yeah.
because people aren't trained to deal with their surroundings and their situations and their awareness. Doesn't matter what you're teaching, right?
Right.
And that goes into, that's a baseline. That's a baseline to martial arts.
Yeah.
And it because it sounds so aloof and so ephemeral. It's something hard to really harp on, but it's there. And the real issue there is that we don't have people. We have people who want to just do kata by numbers or so focused on like doing either traditional or sport part of it. They're not concerned about creating an atmosphere where people are actually aware of what's going on around them. And so, especially when we talk about, because what I feel is traditional karate, in one way, has been repurposed for your self-defense courses. Is your if it's going to be repurposed in a way to be not sold to people, but to be presented to people in a meaningful way, where it's not, why isn't this judo? Why isn't this MMA? Well, if it's not going to be in the sport arena, it's going to be in the arena of life.
Yeah.
And why get on the geese and all that stuff? Well, it needs to be actually put in a way that's going to make people succeed.
Right.
And where people lose with it, where the loss happens, is that they don't succeed with it because they don't know how to represent it and purpose it that way. So, I mean, but again, going back to the anatomy of it, how you rebuild karate to make it more that way, when especially it loses, someone gets put in the hospital or put in the ground for it, is to just look at it from okay, what works, what doesn't work, what's the most important thing, what's not the most important thing, what can we teach implicitly, what do we have to make more explicit.
Right. And those questions keep coming up over and over and over again, and something that may not be completely important may come up later on. It's like, okay, this is not extreme important, but it may be supplemental importance, things like that. I mean, but you also got to be willing to really look at it, go back and look at it from the beginning.
Right, and create what I feel needs to be baseline training.
Yeah.
Which I think is a lot of karate.
Yeah.
Will gloss over with kata.
Well, let's I don't know, necessarily define or at least set expectations on baseline training.
Okay, well, I mean that's really helpful, I think, because baseline training. What is that gonna? What should that look like? What should that entail?
I mean, because how many dojos have you been into that baseline training is, okay, we're going to do kata 1, kata 2, kata 3, exercise 1, exercise 2, exercise 3.
Exactly. And
no, that's not what we're talking about. It's like, okay, we're going to look at maybe exercise 1. Is there anything we need to look at from exercise 1? Then move into maybe kata 1. Go back to exercise 1, go back to kata 1. I mean, that's kind of more your baseline training, is not so much running through stuff and checking it off a list. It's more, how are you really going to study it?
Well, and then what are the baseline skills that are needed, that are required to make your karate work and to make you successful in terms of what you're looking at?
Yeah.
Right? I was working with Raul, and I really want to get him back on the show, but I talk with him a lot on terms of like sparring and kind of like how that gets integrated and how he trains. A lot of it's just very, very. A lot of people say it is kick punch sparring stuff. You know how much training goes into that? You know how much work and time goes into working on the bags and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah.
And how much time we see people spending on the kata by numbers stuff where they don't even know how to punch.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they don't even know how to move their head. They don't even know how to move their body in a productive way. And I'm not saying this is not me coming out saying throw away kata. That's not what we're saying here.
No.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. but there's a baseline skill that isn't taught very well. And this might be something we work on later on this year in terms of presenting.
And really, it's kind of a baseline awareness.
Yeah.
Bottom line. I mean, that's really what we're getting at.
Yeah.
Is because, like, one of the things that that I know I was taught early on was when you are in a group, don't worry about the number. It's like, you better know who's in front of you, who's aside of you. When they move, you move. That's how you train, to really watch the muscles the way that you should. That's how you learn the body, learn how it's going to move. Why is it going to move a certain way? And you better be ready to move with it.
And then you got to train, and then you have to train yourself to react to that, have reaction time, know when to be soft, know when to be hard. And those are things that are harder to put in a curriculum. There are things that are harder, and this is why I feel I'm very post-curriculum in terms of all that, because it's just a lesson. You work on this and you go forward from it, and that's that.
And I get why people do kata by numbers, because it is easy to get that same look, as what, having everybody be in unison. 1, boom, 2, boom, 3, boom. I get it, but it's not preparing you correctly for what kata training is really for.
Yeah.
Especially in a group setting. So anyway, that's just kind of.
So we've effectively taken the anatomy of loss and coming back from that and getting back up, right? And applied it and shown it in different ways that effectively we've always seen in our training. And I feel that if you're listening to this and you feel that, well, I don't know how to apply this, what you're saying is great, but I don't know how to apply it. Look at your own personal history. Look at what you've worked on. Maybe you don't have enough history behind you. That's fine. Talk to your teacher about it. Talk to, I don't know, reach out to us. We have a mailbox. We're on all the social media nonsense. I think it's a worthy conversation to have with yourself and to have with those around you, of how to figure out what that loss is going to be in terms of where your training might lead you, and how to set yourself up for that success.
Yeah, I'd even add, not so much worthy, but it's a necessary conversation to really excel in your training. Period. I mean, it really is, because eventually something's going to come up if you don't start having those kind of conversations. You don't start seeing those insights. Something's going to come up, and not to totally go off kilter, but I love what Dave Ramsey says. There's going to be a rainy day someday, and it's going to rain. What are you going to do?
Is that the chef?
Huh? No, not Gordon Ramsay. No,
okay.
Dave Ramsey's the finance guy.
Can it be Gordon Ramsay?
Well,
because I feel that his whole
one
day it's gonna be a rainy day, and what are you gonna do about it? And I feel that would be a lot more.
Well,
a lot more poignant when someone actually listens to that.
You gotta drop a few hundred F-bombs though in there too, so it's kind of, if it's gonna be Gordon.
I don't have the technology to bleep that out, even though I said a curse word before. So
yeah, but yeah.
You can blame Marty for breaking that, because he's still on his Bermuda Triangle trip or whatever.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that can't into this podcast. That's where Marty's been. He's on a secret mission in the Bermuda Triangle.
Good luck on that one, I guess. Whatever.
So I want to inaugurate. I'm going to be a jerk. So I want to inaugurate kind of a plug for the podcast at the end of the podcast, because I know everyone loves hearing commercial when something starts, but no one loves hearing commercial when it ends. which is sarcasm, which I know people prefer to not listen to the same stuff over and over again. But I want to plug just essentially, if you like Karate Without Belts and you want to listen to more of our stuff, you can find us, because I've been trying to make this easy and I keep on making it harder for myself. We were initially just a YouTube thing, but YouTube's I don't really like it as a platform. I prefer we're mainly an audio platform. We're mainly an audio show. We do some video stuff that will go up on YouTube, and we'll talk about that when we put it together more formally. But if you want to find us, you can find us on all the fun stuff. You can find podcasts at Google Play, iTunes. If you really like the show and you feel that there's some support that needs to be thrown behind it, you can find us on Patreon. We've set a little thing up where we'll be putting some bonus material every month with some other stuff as well. If you want to find us with some other content, people find us on Vision TV. And if you like what we do, you can, comment, subscribe on different stuff, all the standard podcast things. Jeremy is sitting there very, very patiently with a very, very patient smile on his face while I say all this.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
I've been trying to get him to take some of those Ozark millions and invest them in the podcast. But
yeah, whatever. Those are millions. Whatever. Yeah, we gotta. Yeah, I don't want to think about some of the stuff that's got to happen here real quick. So,
anyway, Jeremy, what are you working on this week?
Speaking of Ozark,
fighting the Ozark Mafia, possibly for the last.
No, not so much that. Just getting stuff ready for. A lot of it's going to be getting stuff ready for the rental season for the summer, actually. But basically trying to stay warm and just make sure I'm hitting my times training again. So it's kind of last week was kind of hard. Was it the kiddos were home from doing virtual school and stuff, so I was working, dealing with their virtual school and trying to train at the same time. So that was kind of this week should be a little better.
3 plates, 2 sticks, as it were.
Yeah, so
I get that. I've got I'm still waiting to hear whether or not I might be going off to other places, possibly colder. But for this week, what my training goal is just to have a morning training every day. That's my goal. I think that's the appropriate goal I'm going to set. And I think I'm going to try to put a little something together for people and throw it up on the YouTubes, and maybe they can see that. They can see me in my winter blubber, as it were, working to slowly shed that off. So, cool. Any parting shots you want to give, Jeremy?
No, I tell you what, I figured this would be kind of pretty much a small podcast, but it kind of ended up being fairly. I mean, we got pretty in depth on a lot of this stuff, so it's pretty good. So
yeah, for something we didn't really plan. I literally was typing a email to Jeremy while I was in the middle of a meeting, and I was like, "Hey, you around? Do you want to do a pod? Because we don't need to, but I just want to make sure if we'll do one, we can do one." And you're like, "Yeah, sure, we'll do it on this." I'm like, "Okay, here we go." So there's your free behind the scenes look on how we do things. If you want anything else, you can subscribe on Patreon. All right, folks. Well, thank you so much, and don't forget to keep training.